I remember the very first time I felt that faint whisper of doubt, though I dismissed it at the time as nothing more than the nervous flutter that accompanies new love, that subtle tremor in the chest that hints at excitement yet warns of fragility. In those early months of our marriage, the world itself seemed to bend toward us, softening, brightening, as if the air had become more forgiving, the sunlight more gentle, the very walls around me alive with promise. Every day shimmered with possibility, every smile a reflection of the life I had imagined in secret, the life I had always whispered to myself in quiet moments, the life that had seemed just beyond reach until it arrived in the shape of him. He was charming, endlessly attentive, patient to a fault, or so it seemed, and I, like so many women before me, believed that love alone could hold together two imperfect hearts, that devotion could smooth over cracks too small to measure, yet large enough to shift the course of a life. I gave myself completely, ignoring the tiny tremors, the flickers of unease, because love, at first, has a way of softening the edges of reality until the world feels malleable, until even the cracks seem like part of a greater design. But there were signs, subtle, almost invisible at first, delicate tremors beneath the surface of ordinary days. I remember invitations to family dinners, the kind meant to show unity, but his mother's voice carried a subtle edge, a tone almost imperceptible, yet sharp enough to prick the skin of my self-confidence. Compliments arrived like riddles, veiled criticisms that left me questioning my every action, my every choice, my very instincts. Gestures that seemed innocent left me feeling small, questioning myself, wondering if I was imagining things, overreacting, too sensitive, too fragile to navigate the subtleties of adult relationships. And I told myself these were trivialities, that I was reading too much into the world, that love required patience, compromise, forgiveness. I ignored the uneasy feeling that knotted my stomach, that restless whisper of caution, because I wanted so desperately to believe that this was the story I had always deserved, that happiness would not be interrupted by shadows I could not yet see. The influence of his mother arrived slowly, gradually, imperceptibly, like twilight spreading across a room. Decisions that once felt mutual and balanced subtly shifted in her favor. I noticed how the casual comments of family and friends reinforced her judgments, how they silently validated her opinions, tilting situations subtly against me. And yet I didn't recognize it at first. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that it was a normal part of family dynamics, that patience and devotion could smooth over even the most insidious patterns. I did not yet understand the depth of her influence, the quiet power she wielded, the way she had learned to bend perception to her will, all while presenting herself as supportive, caring, unthreatening. The edges of my life began to blur, lines of autonomy fading as the shadows of control crept slowly into our home, into decisions, into moments that once belonged entirely to us. And then came the emotional manipulation, subtle, persistent, almost elegant in its cruelty. Like water carving stone, it was relentless yet imperceptible until the landscape of my reality had changed entirely. A wrong word here, a misunderstood gesture there, a suggestion presented as fact, and suddenly I was the one misjudging, the one incapable of discerning truth. Gaslighting became the rhythm of our days, a quiet, insidious pattern woven into conversations, arguments, and even silences. I began questioning my own perceptions, doubting my memory, replaying interactions endlessly, trying to reconcile the world I experienced with the narrative that others imposed upon me. Every day became a balancing act, a careful negotiation between my instincts and the manufactured reality that surrounded me. Betrayal arrived in forms I had never anticipated, not from strangers, but from those closest to me. Friends I had trusted, people who had once been sources of light and laughter, lent their tacit consent to my isolation. Their smiles hid judgment, their words disguised complicity, and I did not realize the depth of their betrayal until it had already taken root. Nights became long, restless, filled with a quiet anguish that I carried in the hollow spaces of my chest. I lay awake listening to the soft hum of the city outside my window, the distant laughter of strangers, wondering how easily trust could fracture, how a home that had been familiar could suddenly feel alien. And then came the divorce meeting. The room, though formal, felt impossibly small, the air thick with unspoken assumptions. He arrived with a confidence that left no room for negotiation, a certainty in his voice that suggested the years we had shared were nothing but numbers in an account he believed he could claim without consequence. He demanded everything: the house, the cars, the business, the savings, all as if the very years of my life had no weight, no meaning, no value. Behind him, I glimpsed triumph in his mother's eyes, a quiet nod from those who had assumed my weakness, the weight of bias and favoritism pressing invisibly against the scales of justice. And yet, I said nothing. I let them celebrate their apparent victory while I held silence like a shield, a promise, a quiet fire burning beneath a calm exterior. The nights that followed were a mixture of grief, anger, and humiliation, yet even in despair, a spark began to stir. Every emotion became fuel. Every pang of humiliation, every wave of despair, every whisper of fear was recorded in my mind, catalogued for use in the quiet war I knew I would have to fight for myself. They assumed I was fragile, that I would crumble, that their triumph was final. But they had underestimated patience, resilience, the quiet power that comes from enduring the impossible and emerging unseen, unbroken, unbowed. I began to rebuild, not with noise, protest, or tears, but with deliberate, meticulous effort. I studied law and finance, observed every subtle interaction, documented every slight, every inconsistency, every misstep. Each small victory, a saved email, a confirmed detail, a minor contradiction, became a testament to patience and foresight. I learned to rely only on myself, to rebuild the fragments of my identity, to forge a self that was independent, whole, and untouchable. And through it all, I discovered a strange, profound truth: that real strength is rarely loud, rarely immediate, rarely celebrated. True power is cultivated in silence, in endurance, in careful observation, in the deliberate transformation of pain into strategy. In the quiet that followed the divorce, I began to notice the rhythm of my own thoughts, subtle and relentless, like waves lapping at a shore I had never truly claimed. Every night, every early morning, I felt the pulse of fear and anger intertwine with determination, each emotion a thread weaving the tapestry of a new self, one that had been hidden beneath the weight of betrayal and humiliation. I had been stripped of so much: home, stability, identity, but they could not touch the essence of me, the part that observed, calculated, remembered, and waited. I realized slowly that they had underestimated something far more powerful than wealth or possessions. They had underestimated endurance, intelligence, and silent resilience. I turned my solitude into an ally, immersing myself in law books, financial guides, strategic manuals, anything that could illuminate the path from powerlessness to preparation. Every paragraph I absorbed, every principle I learned, became a brick in the invisible walls I was quietly building around myself, a fortress of knowledge, patience, and resolve that no one could breach. I began to see the patterns of deception, the tiny inconsistencies in their stories, the subtle manipulations that had once seemed invisible. And I documented them, not as a victim, but as a strategist, knowing that each detail, each misstep, would one day become part of a structure too solid to ignore. The early days of rebuilding were harsh. I struggled to establish routines, to regain confidence in my decisions, to trust my instincts after years of manipulation and gaslighting. Doubt was a constant companion. In the stillness of my apartment, I would ask myself if I had overestimated my own strength, if the painstaking preparation would ever matter in a world that had seemed so eager to erase me. And yet, amidst the uncertainty, small victories emerged: an account secured, a document clarified, a contradiction caught before it could be dismissed. Each of these seemingly minor successes became anchors in a sea of chaos, reminding me that the process of rebuilding, though slow, was unstoppable. I observed those who had attempted to destroy me. I watched their early triumphs with quiet attention, noting arrogance, careless mistakes, and the subtle arrogance that accompanies those who believe victory is permanent. They assumed I was fragile, emotional, incapable of strategy, but I had learned that patience, when deliberate, can be sharper than the loudest protests, more powerful than the most visible demonstrations of strength. I let them celebrate their victories, knowing that their overconfidence would reveal the gaps, the cracks, the weaknesses I could exploit, not with vengeance, but with truth. My growth was not only practical, but deeply personal. I strengthened my mind through study, my body through movement, and my spirit through reflection. I cultivated a calmness that allowed me to act with clarity, a focus that revealed opportunities invisible to others, and a patience that ensured every step was deliberate, every action meaningful. I discovered that independence is not merely a state of being, but a skill, a discipline, a practice of consistently choosing oneself even when the world expects submission. Every sleepless night, every hour of quiet reflection, became a lesson in endurance, strategy, and the quiet power of self-reliance. I also began documenting everything in meticulous detail: conversations, transactions, emails, timelines, witness statements, every piece of information that could later illuminate the truth. This work became both a shield and a weapon. I moved silently, unseen, unnoticed, while accumulating the tools that would eventually dismantle the false narrative constructed against me. And in this quiet accumulation, I realized that revenge would not come from spectacle or noise, but from precision, patience, and the undeniable authority of truth. Some nights, loneliness pressed down so heavily it was almost suffocating. I would sit by the window, the city alive outside, and feel the immense gap between the life I had lost and the life I was rebuilding. Fear whispered that I had overestimated myself, that the odds were insurmountable. But within that fear was clarity. The only person whose approval I needed, whose validation mattered, was my own. Every small act of progress, every tiny victory, every piece of evidence carefully preserved, reinforced the fact that I was capable, resilient, and preparing for a reckoning that would arrive on my terms. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, my life began to take shape again. It was not the life I had once imagined, nor the one he had tried to define for me, but something stronger. A life crafted by deliberate choices, grounded in knowledge, patience, and strategy. I learned that true resilience is rarely visible. It grows in silence, in endurance, in the deliberate transformation of pain into purpose. Every setback, every moment of doubt, every pang of humiliation became a tool in the architecture of a self I was quietly rebuilding, one that would one day be untouchable, undeniable, complete. As months turned into years, my life began to take on a rhythm of its own, a rhythm born not from comfort, but from discipline, observation, and relentless determination. Every morning, I woke to a world that seemed indifferent, yet in that indifference, I found clarity. I documented every detail, every interaction, every subtle manipulation or inconsistency, and slowly, meticulously, I began to assemble a mosaic of truth. Each piece of evidence, each note, each carefully preserved document became a thread in a web that I was weaving silently, invisibly, while they celebrated victories they believed irreversible. They assumed they had taken everything, yet they had no idea what I was quietly preparing. The rebuilding of my life was not linear. There were days when isolation pressed down so heavily that even simple tasks felt monumental. Nights when fear whispered that I had overestimated myself, that the world would not allow me to reclaim my life. And yet, even in those moments of near despair, I discovered something profound. I could endure. I could act with purpose even when exhaustion threatened to paralyze me. I could think clearly even when every memory and every emotion screamed that I was alone. Each setback became a lesson, each pang of grief, a reminder that strength is forged not in comfort, but in confrontation with one's own limits. I observed those who had once seemed untouchable, the arrogance of my ex-husband, the manipulations of his mother, the casual betrayals of friends, and slowly I began to see patterns they did not notice themselves. Every small misstep, every lie, every contradiction became a marker, a signpost guiding my strategy. I documented conversations, recorded timelines, gathered financial records, and cross-checked everything with meticulous care. Every interaction became a lesson in human behavior, a piece of the puzzle I was quietly constructing. I was no longer the woman they had assumed was fragile, emotional, or incapable. I was a strategist, patient, calm, and unobserved. There were moments of doubt, nights when loneliness and fear intertwined in ways that made me question the path I had chosen. Was I moving too slowly? Had I overestimated the power of preparation, the weight of evidence, the clarity of truth? And yet, each small victory, a contradiction caught, a document verified, a testimony noted, became an anchor, grounding me, reminding me that patience, when disciplined, is a form of power. I learned to act as if invisible, to allow arrogance and carelessness to reveal themselves in my enemies, while I quietly accumulated knowledge and advantage. My growth was not limited to strategy. It extended into every aspect of my being. I strengthened my mind through study, refining my understanding of law, finance, and human psychology. I strengthened my body through movement, ritual, and endurance, reclaiming control over the physical self that had once been dismissed. And I strengthened my spirit through reflection, meditation, and the careful cultivation of patience. Each day became a deliberate practice in resilience, a careful choreography of preparation and observation. I learned to observe without reacting, to wait without despair, to plan without revealing the extent of my readiness. Evenings became the most productive part of my life. The world outside moved with indifference, unaware of the quiet storm brewing within me. I reviewed documents, reconstructed timelines, analyzed testimonies, and prepared contingencies for every possible scenario. Each misstep by those who had tried to erase me was noted, cataloged, and stored, ready to be revealed when the time came. I realized that true power does not announce itself. It accumulates silently, invisibly, like roots spreading beneath the soil before a tree finally towers above the landscape. The legal landscape, once foreign and intimidating, became my domain. I learned not only the letter of the law, but the subtle ways it could be applied, how evidence could be organized and presented, how contradictions could be exposed. I practiced presentations in front of mirrors, rehearsed arguments silently, visualized every possible courtroom scenario. Each evening, each hour, was a step toward mastery, a preparation for the moment when silence and patience would yield justice. And yet, there were also moments of quiet reflection, times when the weight of what I had endured pressed against me, reminding me that revenge, in its truest form, is not spectacle, but precision. I imagined the courtroom, the faces of those who had underestimated me, the moment when truth would rise and every lie they had crafted would collapse under its weight. In those moments, I felt calm, detached, focused. The world had assumed I was powerless. They had been wrong. Every injustice, every humiliation, every betrayal had been carefully recorded as my mind, catalogued for use when the moment of reckoning arrived. Slowly, meticulously, I became not only ready but unassailable. Every detail mattered, every pattern observed, every subtlety remembered. I had transformed grief, anger, and humiliation into strategy, patience, and precision. I had learned to rely on no one, to trust only myself, to cultivate a form of resilience that was both quiet and indestructible. And in that quiet preparation, I realized a profound truth. The most formidable power is invisible until the moment it reveals itself, and by then, it is unstoppable. The courtroom had a strange, almost sacred weight to it, yet I felt no anxiety. Years of preparation had transformed what should have been fear into calm certainty. Every detail, every note, every painstakingly documented fact had been carefully stored, ready to reveal the truth. I could see him there, confident, arrogant, convinced that his early victories, the alliances he had forged, and the manipulations he had relied upon would guarantee him the life he had attempted to claim. I let him believe it. I let the world believe it, while I held the reality, quiet and undeniable, in my hands. When the proceedings began, I felt a strange stillness. Each document presented, each testimony, each timeline and financial record became a silent blow, precise and unrelenting. Witnesses confirmed inconsistencies I had observed. Emails and records exposed the gaps in his carefully constructed narrative. I watched his face, once smug and assured, begin to betray cracks, subtle at first, then unmistakable, as the truth unfolded like a wave that could not be stopped. His mother, once so confident, shifted uneasily in her seat, the illusion of control slipping as the very web she had woven began to unravel before her eyes. There was a moment midway through the trial when time itself seemed suspended. He realized in a single terrifying instant that the house, the cars, the business, the accounts he had assumed would secure him were meaningless against the unassailable weight of truth. Panic flashed in his eyes, rapid calculations as what he had underestimated, what he had ignored, and what he could no longer control. That moment was silent, almost invisible to the casual observer, yet it carried the full weight of years of misjudgment, arrogance, and betrayal. I understood then, with quiet satisfaction, the potency of patience, the power of preparation, the unstoppable force of resilience honed in silence. Every lie he had spun, every attempt to erase me, every act of manipulation fell away like dust before the wind. And yet, I felt no satisfaction in his humiliation. There was no triumph in the collapse of another human being, no joy in vengeance. My victory was quieter, deeper, and infinitely more profound. It was the reclamation of self, the restoration of dignity, and the undeniable affirmation that I was unbreakable, not because others had spared me, but because I had endured, observed, and prepared. I walked the courtroom with a calmness that made me almost invisible, while truth spoke loudly enough to undo the carefully crafted illusions around me. As each piece of evidence revealed itself, as witnesses corroborated my meticulous records, I felt a strange serenity wash over me. The people who had assumed I was fragile, emotional, incapable of strategy, were now witnesses to a reality they could not deny. The arrogance that had carried them through years of deception faltered, crumbled, and ultimately failed. And yet, I did not gloat. I did not need to. My triumph was internal, secure, complete. I was no longer the person they had sought to erase. I was more than the house, the cars, the business, the accounts. I was the culmination of endurance, intelligence, patience, and strategic foresight. In the quiet aftermath, when the formalities had ended and the courtroom emptied, I felt a profound sense of liberation. Every betrayal, every humiliation, every moment of doubt and fear had become part of a foundation stronger than they could have imagined. I carried nothing but myself, whole and uncompromised. I did not need to shout my victory from rooftops, nor to announce my triumph. The world had already witnessed enough. My revenge had been neither loud nor petty. It had been deliberate, patient, precise, and ultimately undeniable. I walked home that evening with a calm that felt almost sacred. The life I had rebuilt, quietly, meticulously, over years of solitude and preparation, was finally mine in full. I reflected on the early days of my marriage, the subtle manipulations, the betrayals that had seemed insurmountable, and I understood fully the journey I had traveled. Grief, anger, humiliation, and doubt had all become tools, each one shaping me into someone stronger, sharper, and more self-reliant than I had ever imagined. The lessons of those years are etched deeply into my being. I learned that true power is cultivated in silence, that resilience is often invisible until the moment of revelation, that patience can be more potent than immediate action, and that the most enduring victories are those won quietly, without spectacle. I understood that revenge is not measured by the suffering of another, but by the reclamation of self, the preservation of dignity, and the certainty that one has endured and emerged stronger. And so I continue, deliberately, quietly, living a life shaped not by manipulation, betrayal, or the expectations of others, but by my own choices, my own strength, and my own resilience. The wounds remain, as they should, not as reminders of weakness, but as markers of survival, proof that I endured what others assumed would destroy me. Every day is a testament to patience, to strategy, and to the quiet, formidable power of a woman who was underestimated, and who ultimately proved that what is indestructible within can never be erased. Thank you so much for watching and supporting her hidden heart.